Hey everyone, my name is Gideon Mendels. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Comet. Thank you so much for joining our fourth annual Convergence Conference. We have a super exciting panel for you today talking about AI agents from really the experts in the industry. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our amazing panelists. Tharun, do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Tharun. I work at Meta as a partner engineer. As part of this, I help enterprises and startups to help build Gen AI applications on Llama. Very excited to be here. Thank you, Gideon.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Jeremy, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Jeremy Mumford. I'm the lead AI engineer at a company called Pattern. Pattern is an e-commerce company. We partner directly with brands to help them sell on platforms like Amazon and Walmart, and we're the largest Amazon seller in the world. And we're currently looking for lots of opportunities to apply AI in the world of e-commerce.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, Jeremy. And last but not least, Joe.
Hey there, everyone. My name is kind of hard to pronounce for any no Portuguese speaker, so I go by Joe, and that makes my meetings easier. I'm very excited to be here to talk about all things AI agents.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I'm really excited to kind of dig in. Before we kind of talk about agents in depth, I think one question that as an industry we haven't fully figured out is what exactly is an agent, right? I think there's some common differences in the industry how to differentiate a script to a fully agentic workflow. So maybe I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you and your teams define agents. Joe, because Crew AI is such a big name in the agentic building space as a framework and in a library and as a tool, I'm curious how you guys think, what is the definition of an agent?
Well, honestly, I'm a simple guy. I like to keep things simple. For me, an agent gotta have agency. What I mean by that is you really want to have the AI deciding what is the flow of the application, right? If you think about traditional applications and how we have been developing them throughout the years, it's very strong typed in a way that you always understand what are the data coming in, you understand the transformations that are happening, you understand the data coming out. And with AI agents, that should not exist for you to claim that it's an agent. Like, you know, the data coming in, kind of, because depends on kind of like what it's finding. It can be kind of like ChatGPT, a recipe or a PhD thesis, right? And then the AI is actually dictating what happens next. So that would be the definition that I sticks with.
Awesome. Okay. So if I kind of boil it down, there needs to be an orchestrator that is LLM based versus a deterministic workflow. Is that the right way to think about it?
I gotta say that's even better than I said.
No, I'm just trying to understand. It's kind of interesting to see how, but I think I look at it very similarly. Tharun, like Meta, obviously a big player in the open source LLM space, and also with the Llama stack. I actually want to ask you more about that in a second. But how do you guys think about what is an agent?
Yeah, I think in our view, there are three key things that defines an agent. First is autonomy. For example, agents don't need hand-holding. They can break down the complex tasks into steps and execute independently. The second one is like reasoning. So agents should be able to think through the problems, adapting to any new information or unexpected hurdles. For example, in a scripted task, it would fail if something changes, but agent, it should be able to pivot. And thirdly, I think the power is in tool usage. So agents should be able to interact with external systems and mostly existing things that we have built in the past 20 years, to really make use of that. So autonomy, reasoning, and tool usage is where we define agents or agentic applications.
Awesome. I love that definition. Cool. So, so let's talk about how we implement these things and how do we use them. So, Jeremy, obviously, Pattern a huge player in the e-commerce space. I know you guys are doing super impressive stuff, solving like very different and exciting business problems. I'm curious from your perspective, like how are you using agents today? And as generally speaking, where do you see a room for agents to kind of improve existing workflow, whether they're like fully deterministic or maybe LLM powered?
Exactly. At Pattern, we have a lot of opportunities for us to solve problems with AI. It's almost overwhelming. And the way we like to think about AI and agents is we really like the term agentic systems. This is something that Harrison Chase mentioned in an article a few weeks ago, Harrison Chase from LangChain, where he defined agentic systems are things that are both true agents, which is what Joe and Tharun just wonderfully described, and then also traditional LLM workflows that are much more declarative or deterministic as opposed to the imperative nature of agents. And so we see room for both, where we've already in the past, we've built out many LLM workflows that are working together over very complex stacks that are doing incredible things. And now we're looking forward to the next step, which is extending these with more agentic systems or more agent-driven processes where it's not declarative, it's imperative, right? We give it an end task or an end goal to say, oh, this listing on Amazon is wrong, it's broken, we've gotten this signal from Amazon. Here's a bunch of tools, go and fix it. And there's no declared process, right? You just give it the tools to go and fix it. And we're thinking about how can we build out a platform where we can rapidly identify these opportunities and then allow people across our entire org to go out and build agents that can go and solve them. And that's like the big thing we're trying to tackle right now.
Awesome. So you guys, sounds like you guys are investing a lot in the infrastructure to enable more and more of those use cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And maybe Joe, I'm curious from your perspective. I don't know if you use agents internally within Crew AI, but also I'm sure you've seen a lot of exciting use cases from some of your users and customers. Is anything that comes to mind that you think will be interesting to our viewers?
Yeah, well, first of all, I second what Jeremy said. I think, like, honestly, we're calling AI flows now. It's probably the thing that we're seeing most tractions is where people want to kind of like bring actual traditional coding or even like ad hoc LLM calls together with agents. Where, in a good example here about a use case that we're actually seeing a lot of traction with is people that wants to chat with actually structured data. So imagine like, hey, I want to be able to provide the ability for my executive team to chat with the data in our Databricks. What if you think about it, it's interesting and kind of like the rag that we can like have been seeing happening to the last few years, because it's not only about writing the queries, validating the queries, and then to Tharun's point, like if that query doesn't work, then the agent's able to fix that query until it gets the right data. But then like once that you extract the data, you still have to fall back in the regular chat experience where, well, now I have the data, now let's talk about this, let's have ideas about this. So we're seeing a lot of traction in kind of like in that case. And about using agents internally, it's funny because we get a lot of time the questions around like, hey, how many people you have, like how big is the company? And I usually lead saying like, well, we have 150 agents and 30 people. Honestly, I wish I had less people because we're doing a lot of work with agents. They're actually doing a lot of dog fooding.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, we put together here Comet. We have a couple, but the one I think so far that's bringing the most value is essentially like an agent system that helps us answer customer questions and support questions. It's not customer facing. It's still used by the customer success team, but it's hooked up to our documentation, our Slack history, Salesforce data. I don't know if it falls into the definition of an agent because the orchestrator is somehow deterministic, but definitely adding a lot of value.
But Gideon, that's a good point. I think at the end of the day, all these concepts, right, they're very fun and interesting from an engineering perspective to think about, hey, like how is it deterministic? Is it not? Is like an agent, is an LM call? But once rubber hits the road, what really matters is customer value. It's like, hey, am I getting value from this? And honestly, that's what matters. In the end of the day, I think the same original engineering principles that brought us here will keep pushing us forward, and like how we keep things simple. What is the minimum that I can get away with that still adds value?
Yes, I'm with you that 100%. That's eventually I think that's the only way to think about things because I think we all have background in engineering, and overcomplicating things rarely yields results. So 100%. So maybe to follow up on that, right? So I'm curious. What have you seen in terms of like just the evolvement of like the the agent or LLM stack, right? Obviously, like the space is moving extremely fast, right? Like I think on a weekly basis, something big happens, which is just insane. But I'm curious, kind of maybe Joe, you can start, and then Tharun, I would love to hear about the work Llama is doing with the Llama stack. I think some really exciting stuff from your recent announcement. But maybe Joe, you start. You kind of been in like deep in the agentic platform workspace, so curious to hear how you've seen things evolve and kind of where do you think they're going to go in the next year.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's a great question. So what happened, I think most of the companies and people have been going through this experimentation phase, right? Where they're basically trying a bunch of different things and they're trying to get educated or trying to get enabled. And that comes with amazing questions, right? Mostly technical, like, oh, how memory works, like how memory plays a role in my use cases. What kind of open source tool should I be using? Should I do more kind of like an event-based approach or a graph-based approach? There's a lot of interesting questions. Now, what I'm going to say is all this table stakes, right? It's becoming commodity extremely fast. Yes, you're going to need memory. So what? There's like 30 different ways from doing. Create is the easiest. But the thing is, that doesn't really matter as much for you to get to production at scale. So there's this new phase now where companies are going into. There's this realization phase. And that is like, hey, we're going to be agentic native, or I'm going to have hundreds of agents running in production in X years' time, right? And once they start to thinking about that, you realize a few things. One, no framework can save you. Like honestly, like you don't you don't want to have like even Create that I think is the easiest way for it to build. If you build 1,000 agents with Create, that becomes 1,000 GitHub projects. Like how do you maintain that, right? You can see how that doesn't scale. So I think it's become clear that people need a suite of things to manage all their agentic resources. So to your point of the stack, these resources will be the agents. It's going to be their tools. It's going to be their memories. It's going to be authentication. It's going to be scope of access. It's going to be impersonation and everything from the data management layer. When you think about Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, and now the hyperscalers going all the way to agentic apps and actual UIs. But I don't want to get too long on myself here, but I think like the stack is definitely growing quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you though. It's things are like moving very fast, but also like categories are getting commoditized in the speed that like we've never seen before. So it's really exciting. So, maybe like Tharun, I'm curious. So Meta obviously has been like a leader in the open source AI products and solutions. I think what Meta did with, open sourcing Llama, I think we could all be very grateful for that because I think it really pushed the industry significantly. You guys recently launched Llama 4 with a new version of the Llama stock. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about both the model or the family of models and like the stack. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. I think that's a great question, right? I think, open source has always been core to Meta. And I think that work led to the releasing of Llama series of models, right? So with the latest Llama 4, like we have taken another big step forward. So I think, there are 3 key breakthroughs I would call in Llama 4 that are fantastic. So the first one is like native multimodality. So what it means is basically Llama 4 was trained to process like text and images together. So it uses early fusion, not 2 models stitched together post hoc, So that means people can build apps that understand both language and visuals more naturally, like document parsing or visual Q&A, etc. I think the second aspect is like, the mixture of experts architecture. So we have built like 3 scalable variants, Scout, Maverick, and Behemoth. So I think in this architecture, each token activates only a subset of experts, making it compute efficient and scalable. So for example, we have noticed Maverick beat GPT-4o on Gemini Flash on several benchmarks without the massive compute bill. So the third one is like, unprecedented context length. So Llama 4 Scout supports like 10 million context window. This means it can keep entire track of massive code bases or books or even full enterprise knowledge without losing the thread. So I think, with this model and trying to build an agent, here is where we hit the real world, right? So in the past, we used to think like, hey, how do we think like make model work? To now like, hey, how do we build a system using model as one of the component, right? So let's say, we're building any kind of smart assistant. What it does is basically tries to understand the request, searches some documents, or goes make some decisions and responds, right? So to do this, you need to stitch multiple tools together and custom APIs and etc. And most of the times you hope things work in production. And to fix this exactly, we built Llama Stack. So what Llama Stack does is basically it provides like standard building blocks for any agentic application. So it has primarily three components. Like one is like standard APIs, where it provides standard APIs for inference, memory, telemetry. So behind the scenes, you can use whoever provider you want and swap them without changing your app code. Second, it is environment agnostic, right? So you build your app on your desktop, on-prem, or CSP or mobile, it works seamlessly. So Llama Stack is a standard that enables agentic applications run on any device or any infrastructure. And thirdly, it has like built-in safety guardrails where it behaves ethically in all those environments. So I think, in simple ways, it eliminates the problem of like, hey, it works on my machine, but it breaks in production kind of scenarios.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, it's super impressive the work you've done there. And maybe like I'm curious your guys' take on the context window, right? Like, because at least theoretically, with these level of context windows, like, do we still need like vector database and computing chunking and embedding and so on? I mean, I know there's arguments on how well it works, and obviously at some point there's always n+1 that you do need a vector database, but I'm curious, what's your take? Do you think like eventually models will truly get to a point where you can kind of feed everything to the context and not need a vector DB and embeddings? I don't know, Tharun, I'm curious your take. I know, Jeremy, you trained a bunch of models, so yeah.
Here is my take, right? I strongly believe there are industries where they have data more than 10 million tokens.
Yes.
So, and I think also it's not like it's a RAG killer. So I think as the context grows and there's larger organizations' data, I feel these go hand in hand, helping you solve bigger problems. So right now, for example, if your context windows are like 128K, you're trying to fit in and make your upper layer more strong. But if your model is having like a larger context window, your upper layers of search, etc., can be a little bit wiggly and try to give a larger, bigger context for model to get you the precise outcome. So I feel like this innovation will only push forward getting your desired outcomes in a very well mannered, rather than like not a replacement for existing RAG or anything. So that's my take here.
Awesome. Jeremy, because I know you train a lot of models. What's your take? Are we gonna, like, I don't know, 2-3 years from now, are vector DBs and kind of traditional RAG architecture, is that still gonna be a thing?
I mean, I think Tharun described it pretty well. I remember like 2 years ago, year and a half ago, like when like ChatGPT first hit the scene and like we all freaked out and started like just investing so much into LLMs. Those first like models, 4,000 tokens. Your context window was so small. And I just remember like we were agonizing, like, how do we work around this? And we built all these complicated RAG systems. And then like every like 3 months, there'd be like a press release and they'd be like, It's now 8K. It's now 16K. It's now 32K. Then Anthropic was like, it's 120K. It's 200,000. And then Google's like, it's 1 million. Now it's 10 million. And it's just, and so now it's a genuine question. Do we still need all of this crazy infrastructure that we emphasized so heavily in the beginning? And I think the answer is we don't need it as much, right? Situations where we needed it before, we don't need it now. We can just dump everything in. I think there is still value in certain situations, right? There are situations where you're dealing with the internet, right? The internet is a RAG system, right? Where you're retrieving data from the internet, or you're talking to structured data, right? Structured data in a way is still RAG, right? Where you're reaching into databases. There will always be a place for RAG systems, but I would say many LLM workflows and agentic systems that previously required them no longer do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think I'm a little bit less optimistic for vector DBs. Like there's always going to be use cases, right? I think I'm just talking about like the, the 80, 90%. I think like if I look at the history of like deep learning, it's like, oh, every time we hit a roadblock on the modeling part, we solved it with like engineering techniques. Like I come from speech recognition background. We had an acoustic model and a language model, and he was kind of computed based on both of them until we got to the point where we can just train the whole thing end to end. And I'm sure at some low latency scenarios, people still have an acoustic and a language model, but yeah, I mean, obviously, like we'll have to wait and see. But it's the speed, as you mentioned, is very fast. Okay. So we kind of talked a little bit about models. Let's go back to agents. I'm curious, and maybe Joe, you can take this. You guys have helped and built a lot of agents. What is kind of one lesson that you feel like, man, I wish I knew it before I started implementing?
Oh, damn. Just one. I think.
Just one. I'm sure there's many more. Yeah.
That's a good one. Well, I think there's one thing. It's like what I would say. The other thing is I can tell you like some of the most common lessons that our customers wish they knew before they start implementing. I think that will be more useful. What we're seeing from our customer side is most of them, if you do your homework prepping and assessing your use cases, so I'm not even talking about technical work, that can compound into moving things way faster. Like we had customers that spend a lot of time spinning their wheels trying to get something live and like having to figure out the use case, like putting the airplane together was fine, right? And we had other kind of like customers. There are huge companies. Like there's this one company that I'm thinking about is over 160,000 employees, and they're huge. And we sit down with like some of their executive teams. We got a list down together and we say like, all right, let's scope all this like a 3 hours meeting. 30 days later, 5 or 6 of those use cases are now in production running.
Wow.
So like, it's all about sometimes doing that prep work like really, really pays off. So I would say like, people really should kind of like dissect their use cases and really think this through before they get it working. And then just to give you one more technical one would be, one agent that does it also is like shooting yourself in the foot. Like you're breaking this into smaller components is the way to go. It's way faster and easier to get to success like that.
Awesome to see some of these software engineering principles continue. And then Jeremy, I'm curious. I know you guys implemented a lot of use cases. I'm sure you've got burnt once or twice. What is that kind of one lesson that you'd share with the viewers?
I wish we only got burnt once or twice. No, my boss and I feel like we've been burned so many times. We're writing a book about all the mistakes we've made. We're calling applied intelligence of like, here's all the things we've learned along the ways. But I would say like one just like interesting thing that I feel like I wish I had known earlier is how fast it would scale. I've been blown away by how quickly it's ramped up. If you had told me like a year ago how quickly we'd ramp up, I would not have believed you. I mean, we're approaching like 10 million LLM calls a month, and we're just like a medium-sized company, right? And I'm sure by the end of the year, we'll easily hit 100 million LLM calls, if not more. And I think like a warning to anyone who's watching this, who's implementing AI in your company, it's going to ramp up way faster than you expect. If you're a company of 160,000, for example, like Joe said, and you implement something that's used once a day by every single employee, suddenly that's 160,000 LLM calls every day. It goes up really fast. And so you've got to think now of scaling everything around that, right? Like your logging system that goes with it, your observability, like your error tracking, like all of those things like have to scale with that. And so it's forced us, we have to go back now and think about how do we re-architecture some of that core stuff that we built in the beginning that we thought, oh, I'm sure it'll go into the thousands or the hundreds of thousands, but now we're doing millions, hundreds of millions. We're starting to rethink, like, we've got to really re-architecture this because this is way beyond what we thought it would be.
Oh, man. And Jeremy, if you don't mind me adding to that, I mean, we were feeling that as well. So we were seeing like all these companies that are using, right? And there's some companies that's just like out of this earth, like how fast they're scaling. It's insane. You're probably in that group, but I think like I don't have the April numbers yet, but in March we ran over 60 million agents. And each agent does like many LM calls. So those numbers start to compound very quickly. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all thankful that on average inference costs are going down 90% year over year. Because, yeah, I would tell customers that are concerned about costs. I was like if this goes down by 90%, are you good? It's like, yes, okay. So just wait on average 6 more months and you'll be fine. Awesome. So you guys, you talked, Jeremy, you started touching about this, right? Like all these pieces that you have to like scale up in order to support these things, right? Even like you got the logic right, but like this peripheral stack is hard to do. So I'm curious from your perspective, and then Tharun, I know you guys see a lot of that from the meta side. Like, what are like those biggest blockers to making the agents reliable enough, right? I think POC there's one thing, but actually getting it to work is a different story. So maybe Tharun, you can take it, and then Jeremy, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I think evaluation of agents is very complex and challenging. Like, for example, like how do you measure the performance of your agent, right? Like, how do you know it's good enough? So we don't have a gold standard, like, hey, this is the standard for agent to be like performant, right? And also, how do we ensure safety in the enterprise space, right? Like, for example, how can we verify what agent is doing, and what are the guardrails present in it, like to protect, etc., right? So the other thing I feel like, how can humans still have a control, right? Like, for example, let's say we want agents to fail, we don't want agents to succeed 100% of the times. So what's the way, or what's the criteria, and how can we tell agent, hey, it's okay to fail, it's okay to ask for help, right? So I think those are the challenges I think we need to figure out for us to really scale and go for production ready.
Awesome. Yeah, Jeremy, what's your take?
No, I mean, I think you've nailed it, Tharun. That's like the thing we're talking about right now is we're in the middle of designing like the next phase of how Pattern will do AI, where we're thinking about how are we going to build out these agentic systems? What frameworks do we integrate? What do we grow ourselves? How do we design it in a way where they can be reliable? And I mean, human in the loop is a huge part of that. We're thinking of how do we make sure that human in the loop is involved in all these aspects of, if the LM gets stuck, it can call a human. If there's a high risk task or a job that needs to get done, how do we make sure there's a review step, and building a system that can wait 24 hours or a week for a human to get around to reviewing it? And some of the other blockers of building out these agentic systems is just like, how do we build a system that we can look into and observe, but is also robust and wide enough that it can connect into all of these different things, right? Like any company, we're stretched over many different teams, different languages of code, different languages of teams as well, and different like platforms. So if we're on Amazon, we're on Walmart, we're on Alibaba, we're on eBay, right? How do we build like agentic systems that can hook into all of these different systems, some of which have APIs, some of which don't, right? These are the challenges we're trying to figure out. And it's hard, but in the same way that like LLM models solve many of the existing problems of AI trying to solve problems, I feel confident that there are many now tools, like you were saying, Gideon, that are being commoditized that will help us solve these issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Tharun, your point on evaluation is, I completely agree, right? Like there isn't like a best practice on how to evaluate these things, especially given, if the orchestrator is truly like, an LLM call and then multiple tools and so on. A Comet, what we try to do with OPIC, our, agentic evaluation product, is we kind of try to provide customers like it's not perfect, but a really direct way of actually creating this improvement in their workflows. And we kind of took 6 or 7 years of experience in classic machine learning experiment tracking and injected it into like OPIC for this new workflow where the model might be static, but there's still a lot of moving pieces. And the reality is, like, it might not be as sexy, but like it's not that different, right? So we say, hey, if you're building like a chatbot style agent, create a data set of gold data, label data, questions and answers, and then run it every time you make a change, whether it's for a tool or a prompt or an API call or so on. Every time you make a change, run it against that data set. Is it perfect? No, but it will give you a pretty good idea of A, if you broke something considerably, and B, it will give you some idea if you're making progress or you're stuck. And then eventually when you put it in production, you can kind of start labeling some of these real life production interactions, put them back in the data set as labeled as errors, for example, and kind of continue that flywheel. But I agree with you. Like, it's with all these different moving pieces, it's really hard to kind of do this, like, not that black box optimization, but like really digging in. And I think once as an industry we'll figure this out, we're going to see another kind of huge leap. So I'm excited. Yeah.
It's a continuous process, right? Like, you're deploying something into prod and there's automation running all the time to figure out, like, this is more like what's the continuous CI/CD pipeline for like agents, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easier than software because, like, in some ways, right? Maybe that's
that's what scares me. There's no predictability.
Yeah, but it opens some opportunities. This convergence, we launch our agent optimization tool that, given that data set, you can actually run reinforcement learning like algorithm, which will automatically change the flows or the prompt and try to give you a better result. So obviously that's kind of like that last 10%. You still have to do a lot of the work yourself, but I think there's just a lot more value for us to capture. Awesome. So, we started talking about software engineering, and it made me think, like, how do you guys think about just like engineering patterns, right? Like, what would it, like 2, 3, 5 years from today? I think, Joe, you guys already have some form of kind of low code, maybe no code capabilities. Like, how do you think this is going to play out? Is it like 5 years from today, or is this going to be like engineers building these workflows, or are we going to be in a click and drop world? Joe, I'm actually, you guys have been building this space. Would love to get your opinion.
Well, I can tell you the way that I think about it is, one, things are going to go no code. I strongly believe in that because, honestly, especially, I think there's a very strong economic incentive to get penetration into companies. And the only way that you can get that level of penetration that investors and companies want is through getting to the masses, right? And getting to the masses into an organization means that it needs to be accessible. So I think no code is going to be the way that things will evolve a lot. Now, does that mean that engineers won't be the agents? Absolutely not. I'm thinking that it's going to look a lot like websites today, right? I mean, can you go into Webflow and build something in there? Like, even if you don't know how to code, absolutely, it's going to look amazing. Can you hire someone that is an expert in Webflow and do it for you? Yes. Can you also be an engineer and pull up an amazing stack and create something with React? And you can do that? Yes. Will that look better? Probably will look better. We'll have a better experience. It's going to be more customizable more than anything. But those are kind of like some of the things that's kind of like the way that I think that things will roll out. But I don't think that no code, we're going to get away with no code. If anything, people are going to be doubling down on that.
What do you, I'm curious to get your thoughts. I'm happy to share mine about the no code versus lots of code scenarios.
I don't know about no code. I feel like there will always be a place for code. I think what will happen is AI, and we already see this, AI is democratizing code, right? It's allowing more people to get into code that previously hadn't. And I think AI allows no code platforms that maybe would have failed in the past to succeed because of the flexibility and the power it has. You can build these powerful workflows where if you have something where you're like, I don't know what step 3 needs to be, you can just throw AI at it and it figures it out. But I always think there's a place for coding. Our motto at Pattern is, for AI engineers, you should think like a data scientist, but build like a software engineer.
Nice.
And I really think that the people who will succeed the most in the world of AI are those people who have those unique skill sets, those people who have that something about the way their brain works is just different, right? They have that ability to think and solve problems. And I think, yes, you will need to democratize AI with no-code platforms, and we'll see huge usage of that. But I think that even more so, the developers that are 10x developers will become 100x developers with this AI behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. Tharun, what's your take?
Yeah, I think my take is like I think there will be code, but it only differs like who will be writing either the code written by human versus like the machine. I think humans will be the powerful orchestrators on how that code needs to be written. And I think one thing when we start like coding with these agents is it reminds me of like test-driven development principles. So in this agentic space, I feel like it's always best to start with test cases and making sure like whatever the code is you're writing through agents passes your test case. That's the only way you can safeguard your features and all. So I feel like the paradigm of building software is evolving, and we need to rethink like how in this AI world we can build and accelerate like apps and building everything.
Yeah. Who's writing the test? The AI or the actual engineer?
AI writes the test, but I think you need to help AI define like what's the criteria. So it's more like you define very strict requirements and boundaries, and then let it go and have it wild party.
Yeah. I think like this time might be the first time it'll be different, but I think for various use cases, for many years, I think the promise of no code has failed. Other than like I agree, Joe, like websites, like Webflow or Wix, but anything above that, like I don't think ever picked up. This might be the first time it'll be different. I think anyone who tried like a Cursor or a Windsurf and could agree that it feels different this time. But it's a question, right? Like I'm curious, and then if it's truly everything is written by AI and everything is AI generated code, you start thinking about all this work we've put into the software stack and how high level languages manage memory for you because we human forget about pointers and so on. Like, and do we even need all of this if it's all AI generated? I had a customer ask me about, do I think that AIs will just kind of generate assembly code directly? Because why do we need the entire stack above it? And then every release is basically a completely different. It's not even built in a previous one. But yeah, fun times, I would say. Yeah. But Jeremy, I think you mentioned it. You talked about kind of humans. I think someone from Anthropic said humans are basically a very expensive tool call. So how do we think about? It's an interesting way of putting it. How do we think about kind of the human in the loop, right? Whether it's the user interacting with the agent, maybe it's the company that provides this agent for their end customers. How do we think like about the involvement of humans in these like agentic workflows? And maybe Joe, you can go first.
Yeah, I think honestly, humans in the loop are going to be present no matter what. I think it's such an important piece of kind of like how we automated these things. And I think it's also a way for us to fast track adoption if you really think about it. Like a lot of these use cases, this company is really like to meet some of like the high standards that some of these companies require, especially when you're talking about highly regulated industries, right? You're talking about like banks, insurance companies, and things like that. They feel more comfortable about having humans in the loop. If you think about the way that, like, honestly, you folks are using, as you said, like, hey, these agents are not answering support tickets directly. It's someone that our internal teams using to then answer agents. So I think human in the loops are kind of like serving its purpose in here. Like how that's going to play at scale if humans are going to be less necessary. I think yes, there's a path to that direction, especially with now agents having memory and understanding preferences and kind of like growing over that and building kind of like its de facto knowledge and model of like the enterprise and the universe that it operates in. I think like humans in the loops are going to be less frequent. But so far, I gotta say, I really like having humans in the loop. And the fun thing is that you can actually bring them to interact across different channels. So on Crew, for example, on our enterprise side of things, there's a way that you can connect Crew with Slack or Teams, for example. So in that sense, it almost feels like you're having someone in there that you can actually ping or ping you in case you need help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's moving quite fast, and I think there's two options of human in the loop, right? Is it like the end user as the human in the loop, or like a supervisor as that's like that tool call approach, I guess. So everyone, I'm curious, what's your take? Obviously, in the Llama stack, you guys have kind of put a lot of the plumbing to allow for these things. How do you think about human in the loop?
Yeah, I think, if I think from a consumer side standpoint, right? So let's say if I am chatting with a chatbot or something, if I know there is nobody monitoring, I want to get to the human as fast as possible. It's like, hey, 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 right? So I think in this agentic space, like, how do we build that trust? Like, hey, you know what? There's always, like, for the assuring the end customer, like, hey, we have real agent here, right? But let's get through those steps, right? So I think that's a very critical part in designing your apps, to make sure, like, hey, how do you build trust with your end customer, and how do you design your apps? And then, for example, let's say when you're not confident, right? Like, what are the ways you can escalate it to human, right? I think that's the true part where, we have, based on the confidence scores within the stack, like, hey, this is, we're not confident, let me pull you in, right? So I think this kind of orchestration needs to go deep in every app building, so that way it benefits, one, the consumer, like, they're like happy, and on the other side, on, like, whoever is owning the app, they know, like, oh, I would be notified if something of a serious issue. So that's how we think about it.
Awesome. All right, so this was a lot of fun. We're nearing toward our end of our session. So before we wrap up, I want to ask each and one of you is one thing that you're excited about the future of autonomous agents, and then we have to address the reality. One thing that you're concerned about. So Joe, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, one thing that I'm excited. Well, honestly, it's more than one thing. I think it's like how fast it's moving and how it's not waiting for its own protocols. There's a lot of conversations about protocols nowadays, right? MCP, A2A, everything in between, Cisco with agency, and everyone's kind of like pushing for something. And it's funny that AI in general is moving so fast. There's so much incentive for that to move fast that it's not waiting for any of that. It's like saying, no, like, we're going to power through. We're going to use like screen grabbing, mouse, keyboard, navigating the website. I love that energy of like, no, let's reuse like the same inputs that we have. Now, that represents throughput kind of like limitations? Yes, for sure. But at the same point, it allows, like, if you crack that, now it can access everything that we have ever built, and that becomes way more interesting than if you have to rebuild everything. So that's the one thing that I am excited about, is just like the speed and how it's not waiting for like its turn. Now, in terms of things that I'm concerned about is, honestly, I think like how we roll this out at scale in these enterprises. I think people that are not like in the day-to-day and seeing, like, I think they don't feel the pain. Some of the things like Jeremy said, right? And I think that escalates even further, and you go into sensitive data when you start talking about PII, personal information, and all that. I think there's a lot of pieces on that stack that we have been talking about that, even though they're being addressed, is very much early days. And I think like it needs to get super mature for like those super compounding extreme use cases. So it's very early days still. I'm concerned that adoption might not wait for those things to get mature enough.
Absolutely. Awesome. Jeremy, maybe in a couple sentences, we're almost out of time. Something you're excited about and something you're concerned about.
Yeah. One thing I'm excited about, I'm excited to see when like agents are just second nature to us. When we don't even think about it, it's just like the internet, or now even for us, ChatGPT, it's just something we're used to. The thing I'm nervous about is probably the retraining and the massive societal shift we're going to have to make as a country and as a world to adjust to this new reality. We're already seeing it with like record low numbers of openings in industries like programming and writing, where it's already had huge impact. People are going to have to retrain and readjust. New jobs and new industries are going to have to be recreated. And that adjustment period is going to be hard. Yeah. But once we get through that, I think there's light on the other side.
Awesome. Yeah. In a couple sentences,
yeah.
About, yeah.
most excited about the new infrastructure that needs to be placed in supporting like agents for logging, versioning, governance. I think what I'm worried is like this may not become true reality as fast as we hope. So these things could slow down. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess we've got used to crazy speeds of improvements in the last 2 years. So I could see that. Awesome. Guys, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today for Convergence. Thank you, everyone who listened to us. If you have any more questions, you can always kind of hit the chat on the side, and our speakers will do our best to respond to them. And for that, yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.